Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. Today, I've got a very special guest. We've got Vince Nardo with us today. He is currently the CEO of Master Roofing Solutions as well as TimeProof USA, but he's also got a tremendous amount of experience. Before that, he was with Reborn Cabinets, working on that for many years, ended up having a very successful exit. So excited to hear his story and what lessons he's got for us. So welcome to Builder Stories, Vince.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. So why don't you give us a little background, kind of tell us how'd you get into construction in the first place? What led you to Reborn and then ultimately to roofing?
So, when I was in high school, my parents had started a little tiny cabinet company here in California called Reborn Cabinets. And it started to grow. It was started in 1987 or 1983, and it was starting to grow. It was really my dad and one other person. And I watched the business starting to mature. So I went to college for a little while. And then when I was in college, watching the business grow, I was like, my dad's going to need someone he can trust in the business. Just like any startup, you always rely on one or two people, and you're like, they're the whole thing of my business evolves around those two people. And when one of those person leaves, you feel like you're left stranded. So it was an opportunity for me to come in and just, come alongside my mom and my dad and have an opportunity to grow a business, something that honestly I never was interested in being in. I didn't think of construction as my life.
Sure. And so this was pretty early on then. And so it sounds like, what kind of led to you guys taking over, and what would you say were the biggest challenges?
Yeah. So I joined, I say a few years out of high school. I think it was probably like 89 or something like that. And then later on, my brother joined. So my brother and I both worked there. I only have one other sibling. And we kind of looked at the business over the very many years, and it was growing. And, the general rule of thumb is you do a good job, you grow the business. So it grew naturally. But then we looked at the business probably 15, maybe 20 years ago from now, or probably about 15 years ago. And we said, we have an opportunity to really take this business to the next level. I had quite a few kids. My brother had quite a few kids. And we're like, hey, man, if we want to really provide this future for our families, we have to grow this business. Doing 5, 10, $15 million a year is just not going to support as many families are in this business. So we really sat down and made a plan to really press the accelerator and take the business to the next level. And that's kind of what led us to the, later on to be able to successfully exit the business.
Yeah, so I'm curious to learn. Let's kind of drill in a little bit more. Like,
Yeah.
what sort of strategies did you feel like you needed to implement that, again, maybe your dad wasn't doing that, you and your brother came in. Like, what changes are we talking about? Kind of people, processes, systems,
Yeah.
culture.
So the first thing that started with was systems and process. And most businesses that are grown up from the ground up grow through uh what do you want to say? But they grow without systems, right? They grow through tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
And everybody just kind of knows how the cake is made, right? Grandma passed it down. My mom made it. Now I'm making it. And if you told me how I made it, I have no idea. I just know what to do. And we realized that you can't create a stable, growing business on tribal knowledge. You have to be able to create a repeatable business with systems and processes that can be hand down and taught to everybody that comes into the business so that you can ensure that you have consistent results. So the first thing we did was we sat out to really document and systematize every single aspect of the business so that also we could hand our parts off. Right? If this is how the coffee was made, I wanted someone to have a process to know how they can make the coffee, so I didn't have to go show everybody how to make the coffee. So that was really step one, was go through and it was hard, right? We're talking about pre-AI days, right? I mean, literally, I wrote my first CRM on our Apple II Plus. So we're going way back, right? But it was just getting all that stuff documented, put down, and then also using those systems to give us a baseline for when something didn't work. So we would always refer back to that process and say, where was the gap? Was it an understanding of the process? Was it a process break? or where exactly did we go wrong? So it gave us that baseline to really improve things on. And then once we spent, a lot of time doing that, because what a lot of people know is that when you're growing a business, you don't generally have the time to work on the business. So after we, were growing and gathering time to work on it, we then said, okay, now we have this business. It's stable. It's repeatable. Everything's documented. Now what's next? And so we really just sat down and said, if we could look at this business and say, this is what the business looked like when it was done, how do we get there? And that's literally what we did. Was we just set out a 5-year goal and we said, this is where we want to get. We didn't, at that point, really didn't think about selling the business. It was just more, we wanted to have the business worth a certain amount of money and provide our families with a certain amount of flexibility and freedom. And we said, let's do everything we can over the next period of time to get from where we are now to get there. And then
Sure.
everything was just a matter of planning and strategy and strategic decisions to that end.
So how did you, I mean, to kind of go from, just a few of you guys to, 700 employees, you must have been a serious, sales and marketing machine.
Yeah.
Were there certain kind of, KPIs and metrics that you were looking at? And like, how'd you kind of decide, what were the most important metrics that you needed to measure and hone in on, for each of the different aspects of the business?
Yeah. So we definitely started out as a sales and marketing machine, right? I think when people would always ask me what I did for a living, and I said I generate leads and know how to sell stuff, right? That's what I did. It just happened to be that we were in the kitchen and bath space at that time. Um, so if we really break, the nice thing about our business is it's actually very simple. You have to generate a lead, you have to set an appointment, you have to convert it into an issued appointment, you have to send someone out to the home, you have to sell it, and then you have to retain it, right? Not have it cancel out. And then after that, you have to produce it, install it, and collect the final payment. And in simplistic terms, that's the business. So it was all around creating those KPIs or those key performance indicators that said, are we on track or off track at any one of those areas? And then taking those things down steps below that and say, okay, if we want to have, if we want to generate raw leads and set so many appointments, what are let's just throw a number out, 50%. So if we want 50% of our raw leads to convert to set appointments, what actions need to exist to make that happen? And what are the lower performance indicators on those actions, right? Maybe one action is I got to get a raw lead and I got to send out a text campaign. Well, let's measure that, right? How many texts have to go out? How many opens do we have to have? How many responses do we have to have? So everything was really just around the smallest component of metric measurement, and then 100% accountability, and making sure that everybody that owned an area of that business understood those metrics, understood how their compensation was tied to those metrics, and then making sure that everybody's reporting on them on a regular basis. We developed all these different KPIs that we needed within the business, and really about, at each phase of the business, what KPI was required to reach our target goal of how we wanted the business to perform. And then taking those KPIs and breaking them down into the smallest increments, what actions needed to take place, and then holding everybody accountable to those actions, making sure that their position commitments, their comp plans, everything tied to that performance. And then ultimately making sure that everybody reported on those metrics upward through the business at a regular period of time. So we knew if and where there was a gap, what we needed to do to correct it.
Sure. What was it like, I guess kind of in the early days, like how much kind of sort of management structure did you end up needing to put in place and kind of like, walk us through? I mean, I gotta imagine, going from, 10 people to, 50 to 100 to,
Yeah.
a couple hundred to 500 to 700. I mean, like that is an enormous organization of people.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, JobTread's the biggest company that I've run. We've got, about 75 people, but like I know as you add more and more people, you get kind of some challenges with that
You
many
do.
people. So how did, kind of what did that look like, and how did you go about kind of maintaining that size of an organization?
So there's one thing I kind of also realized in business with that growth of people is the business kind of grows and plateaus and grows and plateaus. And every one of those, and the plateaus can be different for every business, but it gets to like you press to get to this plateau and everything runs smooth. And then you're like, I got to press to this next plateau and I got to change things. And then I get up there and like everything runs smooth. So, and that kind of coincides also with the addition of a lot of staff. So every area or every plateau we went to get to the next, the business had to change. And the business might have changed from, I did three things to now I do one. And now I have three people doing three things to more people. And ultimately, where we ended up was we no longer really were a sales and marketing company. We actually became a people development
Hmm.
company, and how could we develop the people into our business to be the leaders that we wanted to have. So it really is all about levels of management and org structure and making sure that nobody was ever over their skis, that they could always handle what they had reporting to them, and that we always made sure that we didn't want to overburden a person with too many direct reports. So whenever we got to a certain level where, we wouldn't want a manager to have 20 people reporting to them, we would add levels below that or add levels above that to spread it out.
Hmm.
So it started to make the org structure multi-layered, where we might have had before a sales manager with 6 sales, reps or 12 sales reps. And then we had 2 sales managers with 12. And then we had 12 sales managers. So then we needed to have a sales director. And then we had, you know, 12 sales directors. So now we need a VP of sales. Maybe we were spread out across a broader region. So we had to insert regionals in there. So it was just really thinking through, how do we keep the org structure as wide as possible rather than just letting keep growing upward. And that's kind of how we looked at it, and then making sure that we had strong people in human capital management, if you will, right? Or human development or human resources to teach people how to manage successfully. And so
Sure.
we spent a lot of effort on classes on training people how to manage, how to pick the right people on their team, how to understand the different personalities, how to, effectively coach and discipline when needed. And so we had to put a lot of effort just around that to maintain that amount of people.
Yeah. No, that's makes a lot of sense, and it's interesting that you kind of started thinking about yourself instead of like a sales and marketing organization. It was a people development.
Yep.
Makes a lot of sense when you got that many people. And so you guys obviously went from regional to national. What did that look like, and what challenges did you see kind of trying to break into new markets, and how'd you pick where to focus on?
So the first one we picked was easy because we picked one that we knew we could drive to if something didn't work. Right? That really literally was the decision. We said,
Yeah.
listen, we're going to open up our first satellite. Let's make sure we could get there. It doesn't require a plane. It doesn't require hours on the road. So we picked, we were in Southern California. We picked Nevada, Las Vegas, right? 3.5 hours. We could solve anything in 3.5 hours, and that allowed us to really press and develop those systems because we quickly learned that, well, shoot, they're shipping the stuff that needs to go to Nevada to California. That's a problem, right? So
Yep.
we got to start fixing the processes. So we used that as a way to iron out the wrinkles, and then once that got established, then we stretched it farther. Um, and that's kind of how we thought about it. And the biggest challenge, I think, was making sure that any office we opened had the culture of the business that we wanted.
Hmm.
And so we had the best success, and we kind of lean into always wanting to recruit to build a new region or branch with a plant from someone from another branch that already kind of understood the culture of the business and took that with them. And that was very important. And I think, we realized, we set out again when we looked at rebuilding the business, 15 or so years ago. We really started with our core value and values, and we realized that in our business, our number one core value was to build a winning team because we realized that our people were our greatest asset. It wasn't the product, it wasn't the customer, it was really the people. And if we didn't focus everything on the people, we would never accomplish what we needed to accomplish.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like, again, people are everything, and when
Yeah.
people, and businesses can focus on, the people, the culture. I mean, it's do you want your people coming in every day excited and passionate, or do you want them dreading work and looking at this like I'm punching in and punching out? I think it's really important to unlock someone's potential. You got to focus on building a great place that they want to come into.
And that takes a lot of work because the unfortunate thing about business is we tend to always only focus on the broken parts,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And because we expect it to work, we don't expect it not to work. And so when it doesn't work, it's what we're constantly focusing on. And it's very easy to lose track of the positives and only work on the negatives. So you really got to put a lot of effort. We actually, we thought of it as like it's internal marketing, right? We have our external marketing we do to generate leads, and we have to do our internal marketing with our people to continually market to them
hmm,
about why they work there and what's going on in the business. So it wasn't as much, obviously, as much effort as lead gen, but there really was a marketing effort to internally market to the people.
yeah. That's interesting. What would you maybe can you shed a little light on like what did your your interview, your hiring, what did that whole process look like to make sure that you brought on the right people that were going to be a good fit with the culture?
So we did a lot of training on that. And we kind of landed on that we wanted people that were, capable of doing the job. They were hungry for the job, but they shared the general culture of us, which was, we while we were a family business or a family, I like to call it a family with a business, but because we had that kind of family atmosphere, we wanted people to kind of have that understanding and want to be a part of that. And so we kind of looked at they didn't necessarily have to know how to do the job. They just had to have a willingness to want to learn to do the job, and they had to culturally fit. And that was more important than anything was a cultural fit. That was key.
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of sense. So my understanding is you landed a huge deal. You got into Costco. I'm curious how did that deal happen, and what did you guys learn from working with such a large retailer, and how did they how did they impact your business?
So we've always been involved in what we call, SF&I programs or sold, furnished, and installed programs, whether it was with Costco or Walmart or, Sam's Club or Home Depot or whatever, Lowe's. But I had an opportunity to go up to Seattle to talk to Costco to be as a dealer for another program. And during that visit, I was, talking to them, and what made Reborn cabinets a little unique was that we were also a manufacturer. So we manufactured all of our own products on the cabinet side, not the bath side. So when I was up there, I had an opportunity. I'm like, guys, listen, this is a very fragmented space, blah blah blah, and I think it's an opportunity for you guys to really anchor in where a lot of the other retailers are failing. So what it so we got that opportunity to do a pilot. Obviously, got an opportunity to exceed past the pilot. And I think what it really taught us as a business was it upped our game in the level of service that we were offering. Now we were good already. I won't say that we were bad, but when you're dealing with a retailer, you're second to them. And those retail brands, while they might share and you might share as a business your same customer focused result, you really want the customer to have a happy result. When you're a retailer, it's even more a major retailer, it's even more under the microscope, right? The customer expects even a higher level of service. And you as a brand working under a retailer have to remember that, you're second to them. And so it allowed us to really hone and improve even what we already were doing good to really make it great.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you think that you guys did really good? What did you do right with sales and marketing? And what do you feel like most remodelers they struggle with and they never get figured out?
Yeah. You know, I think most remodelers really just suffer with holding themselves and their teams accountable to their plan.
Hmm,
I talk to a lot of people a lot, obviously, and the common theme I hear is the common thing I hear is they don't really have that totally defined plan, that model that says, this is what we have to do, right? It's easy to say I got, like we said earlier, raw set, issued net sale, retain, but to really take it down as deep as they can and really then hold the entire thing we do on the sales and marketing side to that performance. And then, and pivoting quick. We're constantly, I have a very good CMO that worked with me at Reborn, now works with me at this new business. And constantly, she's running pacing reports and pivoting and turning things off and turning things on a daily basis. It's a full-time analyzation going on about what's going on. But I think a lot of these guys don't know what to expect, so then they don't know when to pivot
Hmm.
because they run with best intentions, but not really with a defined plan.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to contractors all the time, and I love asking the question. So, do you have an annual budget?
Right.
Do you have a monthly budget? Do you have goals? Are you hitting those goals? Or what are the main drivers of those goals? And so many times they don't,
Yeah.
and it's just like, well, why not? And they're like, well, I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
I don't have an MBA. How would I know how to build a financial model? How do I know what I should, be able to spend to generate that income? And it's like, like I see that all the time. So what advice would you give, to contractors who say that and they don't know where to start and they don't think they can do it and they don't know the value of it. Like what would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is the one thing that I really appreciate about this industry is there's a wealth of successful people that will share their knowledge.
Yeah.
I can honestly say, and I work at some other industries, that this industry specifically is very unique because we're so people based, right? Everything we do is a person interaction. We're not building widgets in a warehouse that we never see that ship out to another state. Our businesses are all around people. So that generally creates relationships that we're people relationship based individuals. So leverage that. The contractors need to leverage that and need to talk to other contractors. And the big guys will share. When I was a small business, I just talked to the guys that were 5 times my size and said, how do I figure this out? How do I figure that out? You have to be a student of success, right? That's in a lot of books, but you really have to take that initiative. And then the other thing is everybody knows what they really do know what metrics need to be. They're just hesitant to start monitoring them.
Hmm.
And my advice would be pick anything. Pick any metric and just look at what you've been doing, look at what you are doing, and then think about how can I make it better?
Yeah.
And then just really focus on that. I don't care what metric it is. I don't care if it's, um, how do we get the office carpet cleaner, right? It's dirty every 3 days. Well, let's look at the metric. She comes in once, the cleaning company comes in once every few days, blah, blah, blah. Let's start monitoring that and seeing when it gets dirty and figure out that we got to come in every 2 days instead of every 3 days. It's real literally as simple as that.
Yeah. So how often did you feel like you needed to kind of pivot this strategy? I mean, getting, early on, you kind of set a strategy and you go execute and then, are you looking at this annually? Are you looking at this quarterly, monthly? Like how much kind of, sort of these reviews and looking back and saying like, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? Like how regularly should that happen?
So we're looking at it daily.
Daily.
Yes, daily. We're making decisions on pivots and movements in the business every single day. Um, they can be as minute as maybe there's a branch that's underperforming this week and has been consistently underperforming. We might have to stop spending as much marketing in that branch next week because our cost of marketing is in jeopardy of hitting our target by the end of the month.
Hmm.
Right. So we're looking at those things every single day. Um, and then we're looking at it on a daily basis for daily changes, and then we're looking at it on a monthly basis for how does that impact the future. But we're trying to stay a few months ahead of where we want to be so that we can actually not just affect next month, but affect the following month.
Yeah.
And we want to start getting our forecasting farther, earlier and earlier so that we can be changing, months out rather than just worrying about next month.
Sure. What do you think were your biggest challenges to growth?
Um, the biggest challenges were development of people
Yeah.
and really being able to take folks and when you're growing a business, The business I'm in right now that we've started, and we can talk about that a little bit. That thing's been growing, 50 to 100% a month.
Hmm.
And so you're talking about significant growth. Now we're in a startup, so it's expected to grow that much, but really making sure that we can bring folks into the business at the pace that we need to and get them up to speed at the pace we need to.
Yeah,
So focusing a lot of efforts on that training and development so that we can, because that's going to be your biggest hiccup in growing a business is the people,
sure.
and having the correct number of people and the people that understand the process.
So before we talk about the new business, I'm very curious about this exit here that is I believe 2022. You sold the business to Renovo.
Yep.
What can you kind of tell us, like, what were the decisions, and what was sort of happening that led you to that point? Was there something you were trying to solve? Was it just a great opportunity to take chips off the table? Like, was there a problem with Reborn and how you're growing that you needed to sell to a private equity firm? Like, how did that all sort of come to fruition? Because I see a lot of people that they say their goal is to be able to sell their business one day, but they don't really know, like, what's it going to be like, and how are we going to make that decision, and when do you know if the time is right to exit?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, if you continue on the story, we know the what I had hoped would have happened obviously did not happen, right? The absolute worst thing that could ever happen, which is bankruptcy for all the businesses, is what ended up happening. But we don't have a crystal ball when we make those decisions. But the reason the decision was made, um, and obviously, if I could predict the future, I probably would have made it differently. But as we know, back in 2019, 2020, 2021, private equity really came into the replacement contractor space, right? They'd already been playing with windows and HVAC and plumbing, but they really came into, replacement contractors, kitchen, bath, and interior guys, right? Where they never touched us before. And so when I looked at the business, now mind you, at that time, Reborn was very large, it was well north of 100 and, in the mid 100s, very established, largest on the West Coast. So the risk I looked at was at some point, there's a risk or a threat of a private equity firm coming in and needing to take my markets away from me.
Hmm.
And when you're a family run business, that's my family's money, future, houses, my kids, my grandkids, that all crashes down, right? We don't there's no, like, it's not like we have, $50 million in the bank that we can weather any storm. It's a family run business. We're
Yeah.
all in. So I looked at it and I said, okay, these guys are all coming into play in our space. What risk does that put against the business? How hard does the business become if a private equity firm comes into California and the states we are in and says, I'm just going to throw $40 million at the problem and market over them. So that's kind of what made the decision, honestly, is I just looked at it and said, you know what? If I don't do something, I could jeopardize the 1,000 employees or 700, 800 employees that worked at Reborn's futures, and I don't wanna put that business at risk. Now, granted, they all got screwed at the end of the day anyway, and I'm sorry for that because I could never have expected that. It's been terrible. I'm still dealing with the aftermath. Um, but that was the reason.
Yeah. Were you were you promised, some promised things about the business that, how it would run or what it would be like, kind of post sale,
Yeah,
that didn't match reality?
you do your due diligence, right? You try to fix the best suitor. You're dating for a short period of time. I think the people that purchased us, which was Audax, was the private equity firm. I think they had the best intentions. Um, they bought 7 businesses in a period of 18 months. It was a $600 million a year business before it went bankrupt. So it was very large, 2,000 employees. So I think they had their very best intentions. They didn't know what needed to be done to run the business.
Hmm.
They failed to ask the successful people in the business, which was their biggest mistake. And, there's one thing I will say, and it's very odd, but the minute I sold my business to private equity, for somehow I became an idiot in the business. Like I didn't know
Hmm.
what I was doing, right? It's like, well, I built something from scratch pretty much, so I must know something. But
Yeah.
that's what I think happened. And so that there's other private equity firms out there that don't share that, don't operate that way, have kept, the prior owner operators in place to help run the business. Now we were in place to help run the business, but we really weren't guiding the business. So they made some very bad mistakes. I also think they acquired the business during the perfect storm. Nobody anticipated interest rates to do what interest rates did post COVID. And they all bought businesses with very, very cheap money. And when you take what happened after COVID, which we all could have predicted was a little slight decline in the business, right? You didn't expect the COVID wave to ride forever. But when you take that slight decline, those of us that have been in the business long enough, we dump more money in the business when that happens, right? We're
Hmm.
marketing more, we're spending more. But these guys had that against them, plus a debt load that they didn't anticipate because interest rates jumped. So it was just a perfect storm. And ultimately, if you read the news, they lost the business to the senior debt lender, which was BlackRock, and BlackRock tried to keep it for 16 months or 12 months or so, and just gave up.
Yeah. Was there a point in time where, because I mean, obviously with the leverage buyout, like, I mean, did you did you start to feel these strains, from that debt structure and the rising rates, like where you had some visibility that things were taking a turn, and how did you start to sort of like, rationalize what was happening and what needed to be done?
Well, I can tell you that none of us ever thought that a Chapter 7 was going to happen. There was
Yeah.
no reason that that needed to happen. I mean, I was exposed to what was going on in the business. That was the ultimate price everybody paid for someone's bad mistakes. That
Mm.
never needed to happen. The business was not that bad. Um, but we did have exposure to what was going on. We knew what was going on in the business, and it's just all about um, risk management, right? I think they didn't want to take the risk or manage it or just deal with it. You know, BlackRock's not an operating company; they're an investment banker, right? They want to invest and want somebody else to deal with it. So I think they just said this is too much for us to deal with. But what we saw was the general thing we see in a business: highs and lows, and you got to be all in all the time. This isn't a business where you have an opportunity to take your foot off the gas. And I think that's just what failed. They took their foot off the gas.
Yeah. So my first business was a software company. We ended up selling it to a private equity firm as well. They immediately they bought us. They bought our biggest competitor right after that, and we only competed with one of our competitors' products. So naturally they wanted to kind of put us up under
Yeah.
that bigger company. And I was 23 when I started this first business, and I think I was probably 31 or so when this all happened. So it was for me, it was a very challenging, thing to go through. I mean, you kind of all the money's fun and everything, but then it's like, all right, well, I got to keep living, got to keep working. I'm excited. This is exciting times, and I thought there was going to be this great role, and I was going to help play this, kind of help merge all these companies together, and it became very challenging though when I went from being that owner, entrepreneur, the head guy, to I'm now having to report to someone, and we got to have these weekly meetings, and we're going over all these details, and like for me that kind of lost some of the fun,
Hmm.
and it became just like, man, like I knew there were a couple guys with some spreadsheets that were kind of modeling this whole thing out, and ultimately, I ended up getting ousted from my own company 1 year and 1 day after they bought it. They fired me and our CFO, who was my dad. So he was first person I hired in my last company, his first person in this company, and you know maybe not first in this one, but he was involved here as well. It was very challenging though to kind of make that transition, and I think a lot of people they feel like it's, oh, when I have all this money, and the grass is going to be greener, and like life is going to be even more exciting, and the business is going to grow and flourish, and like like it wasn't that,
Yeah.
and it was just like kind of very deflating, and like for me, ultimately after they ousted me, they came in, and for a while they were like, oh, we're gonna merge these two products together, and we're gonna get the best of both worlds, and they ultimately ended up saying, actually, we're just gonna shut yours down, put it on the shelf, told all the customers they had to migrate over. They jacked up the price. All my employees, basically they said, you can, come move to Buffalo, or you can leave. They didn't care. I mean, they basically just
Mhm.
gutted the whole thing. And like, to see your baby after like a decade, go
Yeah.
through that. Like, I mean, I gotta, I'm pretty jaded, I refuse to talk to private equity right now. And like, it's something that I'm curious if you sort of had that same like, experience and just sort of feel like, man, like, did I make the right decision? It probably worked out for both you and I personally, but like, man, like to see your customers, to see your employees and like
Yeah.
just the changes, like that's so hard to stomach. And again, I mean, for us, it was, it was a year later and, it's over the next several years, that the whole thing sort of, got put on the shelf. But like, I mean, for you guys, I mean, to see hundreds and hundreds of people, just
Yeah.
basically get laid off overnight. Like, I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, I mean, that must haunt you.
Oh, it does. Um, I feel myself, my family, we feel a personal responsibility for all of that happened. While it wasn't our responsibility, we actually had no control over any of it. Um, uh, some people say, it was selfish. You guys sold the business. You knew what you were doing, and that's really not the case. We sold the business because we wanted the business to live forever.
Yeah.
And my dad did it. And I don't care what anybody says, and for me to have to go tell my 90-year-old dad that the business he developed, and that he built is gone, that's a hard conversation, you
Yeah.
know, and it's a business that he wanted to live on for his legacy to live on forever. And it's literally gone. And so, yeah, but I think it educated me, and I'm working with private equity again. I was asked to come out of
Interesting.
retirement and, I knew I did better vetting this time,
Hmm.
right? I knew what to find out. I knew what research to do, and I'm working for the best guy now. And I can tell the difference.
Yeah.
And most importantly, the group I'm working with for now from now listens. And I don't expect them to always do what I say. I am not the smartest guy in the room, nor do I ever want to be the smartest guy in the room. But I at least want to be able to offer my opinion, voice it, and be challenged, and then to talk through it. And I've got that in this group now. I've got the opportunity where I can state my case. It's not like, hey, it's my way or the highway. It's a relationship, and that's what I really enjoy about the group I'm with now versus where I was before.
Now, are you? I mean, you're still in control, and you're running the company. I mean, like,
Yes.
when you think about kind of, and again, many other contractors out there, we all see, private equity coming in and they're, trying to consolidate and they want to buy and roll up all these companies and, it's the same playbook, right? Like, I mean,
Well, our playbook's different.
the new one, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Well, the guys
but
I work for with today are different. Yes.
what would you tell those existing businesses though, who are sitting, right where you sat, back in 2022? Like, what advice would you give them? Like, are there things that like you think that, because again, obviously this is a very valid, this is a great, path for
Yes.
many people, but how do they find the right people to partner with to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen to them and their employees?
So we're what we did not have the ability to do was to vet out the history of that private equity firm that purchased us, because all the businesses that were purchased in 18 months. So there
Hmm,
was no historical track record in our space. They
got it.
had successful track records in other spaces, but there was not another home improvement guy that had sold to this private equity firm 5 years prior that I could go say, how's it going? Right? How's it working? So what I would say to your listeners is, to the contractors that, you guys talk with, is you want to talk to the guys who sold to that private equity firm already, and kind of understand what's going on in those businesses. And are they still happy? And do they like what they do? And just do your research that way.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to be key. And there's some very still strong private equity firms out there that are doing, a lot of acquisitions in our spaces. And then also understand what's their acquisition strategy. There's a lot of guys out there that do their acquisitions differently. Some fold them in, convert them to their current brand, and the other brand goes away. Some leave all the brands independent. So you also have to think about how will you go to sleep at night? Are you okay with, job tread no longer being job tread tomorrow, right?
No.
And everybody wears a different shirt? Or do you really want that legacy of job tread to live on, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to really think that through.
So having that industry, that domain knowledge and expertise is so important. Making
Yeah,
sure that they're not getting into this new industry and they don't understand the business and how things work. Because again, from a spreadsheet, things can all sort of be modeled and look similar,
right.
but like in reality, like if they don't understand the day to day and what it takes to successfully sell the product, to install the product, to be able to kind of deliver that great customer experience, and that's where they often want to come in and let's just kind of squeeze it here. Let's take away these things there. And it's like, they don't get the end to end kind of experience that you have built your business trying to deliver and want to maintain. And, they just see it as places to just, kind of try to squeak that profit a little bit higher.
And this business can't run on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
While we model it on a spreadsheet and we predict it on a spreadsheet, it's like we said, it's people based, it's lead gen driven, and it changes very quick. And most of the private equity firms out there that have been coming don't understand that area of the business. They don't understand that, if we're going to grow 20% next month, we need to up our marketing spend this month 20%, so our P&L is going to be upside down
Yeah.
right this month because it's all pre-spent expense before you grow. So while that in theory they understand that, they have a hard time. And then as it's going in the month and you're seeing that maybe the metrics aren't off and they're like, pull back spend. I mean, the minute you pull back marketing spend, you might as well just stop eating. You basically starved your business. You stopped eating food.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that'll kill any business is your marketing. Like, you never cut your marketing.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
So you're now running two different businesses. You've come out of retirement. You're working with the private equity again. What changes, or kind of what did you look for, and what did you insist on, when deciding, to go run a business again? Like what did you
Yeah.
want to be different?
So this one's very unique because I was brought into it by a friend. So I'm very good friends with Mark Birch, who had started Service Finance Company and sold that a few times. It's currently owned by Truist. And so he had retired, through my years of knowing him and being friends with him, he's always said, "Hey, Vince, we got to do something. We got to do something." I'm like, "Yeah, but I got a gazillion non-competes and non-solicits and all sorts of crap. My hands are cuffed, right?" Because that is when you do sell your business, you've just given up your livelihood. You're giving up your future of what you can do. So just remember that. Um, but so he came to me and said, "Listen, I'm working with this company called the Walter Group, TWG Global, and we had purchased this roofing company, this direct to builder roofing company a few years ago, and we always wanted to grow and build a direct to consumer roofing company. And do you want let's do it?" And I said, "Oh, you know what? Roofing's not in my non compete, so I could do roofing because we weren't doing roofing." So I said to him, I said, so we put out a perform on this new business, the retail side, and they said, "We want to go from here to here in this period of time. Can you do it?" And it's aggressive. And I said, "Sure, I can make a stab at it, but in order to do this, I really need to bring in some friends because you guys want to you want to make a national business overnight." And so I went back to my friends that had sold their businesses, and some other friends I'd worked with for a long time in the businesses, and said, "Hey guys," 5 of them, and I said, "Hey, you guys want to come with me, be some regional presidents, and we'll build the crap out of this thing." And so they allowed me to do that, and they had to be committed to the capital. So what's a little different with our business is it's not done by acquisition; it's 100% greenfield.
Love it.
Because one of the acquisition challenges is culture and system integration across the businesses, right?
Yep.
These guys that do LBOs and start wanting to layer all these things in are hoping to leverage the platform and insert under, and then leverage by reducing people and harmonizing systems. Well, that all sounds good in theory, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So we kind of looked at it and said, "You know what? They're willing to foot the bill. We'll go out and we'll do it from scratch, and we'll build everything on the right basis out of the gate versus having to convert anything else." And so, we started this project. Actually, I think next month might be my 1-year anniversary. Um, and then during that process. They had a prior CEO of the direct to builder roofing business, which is a big business. It's $100 million a year roofing company in California. And they said, you know, we have an issue. We would like to part ways with that CEO. So they parted ways with him, put me over that company and me over the TimeProof brand. And then I just built a winning team. That's honest what I did. I stacked the deck.
Yeah.
I put the best C-suite I could find together. I put my regional presidents in place. We let them pick their ops and sales leadership and everybody else, and really a winning team. And I mean, we're on a $140 million run rate right now. We're only 6 months into the business.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's a pretty rapid growing business, and we'll exceed that by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But it's having the right people.
Yeah. I mean, that's it was interesting. I was wondering how you went from cabinets to roofing. You mentioned the non-compete. Now, how would a non-compete survive when the whole thing went bankrupt?
Because the thing went bankrupt 4 months later.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting though. Again, when so many people, they don't have that advantage of being able to leverage, private equity, leverage, and investment dollars. But again, what I'm hearing is, what you did is invested in the thing that you knew would make the biggest impact, which is building the best possible team that you could.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I tell people, like you got to have people who are better than you, who are smarter than you. Like, surround yourself with the best people that you can, because at the end of the day, like, you can't do everything.
No,
And as entrepreneurs, we all want to just keep putting on every hat, and we think we can do it the best, but
that's right.
like, you can't scale, and you're gonna
No.
get burned out, and it's just too much for one person. If you truly want to build, a very successful company that can scale and grow, it's gonna take a team of people.
Yeah, you literally have to be in the people business.
Yeah.
You know, being strong on, building teams, especially building ones as big as I have from scratch with very strong personalities. Um, that's not for everybody, and you have to be strong, and you have to be stubborn, right? I gotta be stubborn sometimes. I gotta also be able to listen sometimes. But I gotta make those tough decisions for the betterment of the whole entire organization.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's, with that comes bigger reward, but that's also the bigger weight I gotta share. I
Yeah.
gotta be the guy I'm the guy that TWG calls up when they don't like what they're seeing on the numbers, right?
Yeah. So is there what's the vision here? Is there a timeline, for this business? Where do you want to take it? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to continue expanding. I think we're about 25 offices right now across the US. We've got to obviously, can I say this is easy to build? Hell no. Right? I mean, you can't building a brand that didn't exist nationally is just a monumental task.
yeah,
Um, so we've got to, we've had to make a lot of changes. We've had to pivot a lot. Some are painful, some aren't, um, but it's just we want to continue to grow it. We're going to continue to grow our direct to builder side business in California and expand that across the US, and also our direct to consumer business. And then once we get everything stabilized, more branches open and everything working and humming, um, then bring in more products. Again, roofing is just a thing that we offer. It's not what we do.
sure.
So just continue to grow it and really build something that's not out there.
Hmm, it's awesome. So after 40 years or so of family legacy, to have it in the way they did. I mean, what does building something that lasts mean to you now?
Um, it's for the people. I don't need any more money, to be honest with you. I'm comfortable. It's more about I want to build something that, my son's back at this business. He was at the other business. My brother's back in this business. He was at the other business. Actually, a lot of the people, as many as we could get. Now we could only get a tenth. We could only needed a tenth of them, but to get all those people back to work, number one, give them something that they couldn't get on the last go around, right? Give them an opportunity that, they were all in. These folks were all in on the last businesses across the
Yeah.
country. They put their lives in front of it. And I want to be able to build something that will continue to grow, and while I might be working for private equity, I'm really not. It's really like a family office. It's one guy's money, right? It's Mark Walter. It's his family office. He owns, the Lakers, the Dodgers, the Cadillac F1 team, Carvana, tons of, I mean, he owns a lot of stuff. So, he's got a business full of winning businesses. And I want to build another business for him that's a winning business.
That's awesome. I think that's and same here with me. I mean, it's not about the money this go round. It's how do you make the biggest impact
Yep.
on the most number of people? Whether they're your employees, whether they're your customers, your partners. Like, I think life is too short to not spend your time doing what you love. And for people like us, I mean, we have that entrepreneurial itch to create and to
Yep.
add value and to build organizations that can thrive and grow. And I would say to everyone out there, I mean, when all you look at and when all you think about is that exit and how
Yeah.
much money you're gonna make, or how much you're paying yourself today or tomorrow or whatever it is, like, man, like that is so short sighted.
Mhm.
And I think, I would imagine, you would agree with me, like, you can have all the money in the world and like it isn't gonna just make you happy.
Oh, no.
It isn't gonna
No.
fulfill that desire, to create and to help others. And like that's that's I can sense it through you. It's about the people, and it's about, changing others' lives, to try to give them what we have been very fortunate to
Mhm.
have for ourselves. And having that, financial freedom is incredible. But like, so many people out there work so hard, and they also deserve to have that same experience. But it takes, investing in yourself and your people, and building a great organization. And it's not easy.
No.
If it was easy, everybody would do it.
That's
you
right.
know it takes a lot of hard lessons and a lot, I mean, I think you've learned one that's harder than probably all of us will ever learn. But like, the fact that you would get up and go do it again, I mean, that says a whole lot about your character and just what really matters to you. And I hope that everyone else sees that, because, again, it's Vince, you don't have to get up every day and do this.
No.
I don't have to get up every day and do this. It's, we take a beating sometimes,
That's
but
right.
like, it's about, helping other people, and it's about giving back to this world. And I think that, when you put that good energy out there and you create, great organizations, like, just good will come from it. And
Yeah.
I hope that,
We
you know yeah.
I was and listen, I mean, we align 100% on that, and, and those that don't do that probably can't understand it, but it's like why you do this series. It's why I speak on these series, right? I wanna help those other businesses. I won't get a return from doing this, right? I
No.
do this because I wanna give back like you do to those other businesses out there so they can pass that along, and they can, pay that forward, if you will, to use
Yeah.
that phrase. And, I think that's what makes our worlds a better place, and then also what gives opportunity to everybody. And, it's amazing, and I'm sure you realize this and you know this, but the amount of people we impact their lives between not just the employees or the team members we have working for us, but their families, their immediate families, right? And it goes on, and you watch, people that have worked for you for, I had the opportunity to watch people that worked for me for 30, 40 years, but, they grow up and then they have kids and their kids are having kids and their lives are changing. And, to hear that story of that guy that, was, I mean, literally was sleeping in his car, his family sleeping in their car, and we gave him a job and now he's got a house. I mean, that's what it's about, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's why we do what we do. It's not to line my pockets. I mean, that's obviously because of the amount of effort we put in, we get a higher, hopefully get a higher return, right? Because we're the ones waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, going to bed at, 11 o'clock at night. But it's ultimately to give back to the other people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Well, Vince, I really appreciate you coming and sharing this story. I know it's couldn't be easy, to have to keep recounting what happened. And obviously, though, you should be very proud of yourself for the business that, you built with Reborn, and kind of being able to go and doing it again. I mean, that's awesome, really awesome to see what you're doing and just how much you're giving and pouring into this to make them very successful. As we wrap up here, I'm curious. I mean, if you had to choose, one or two piece of advice to give others, other contractors who are, maybe earlier on in their career, deciding whether to go full time or just starting off, or going through something, with the business. Like, what advice, do you wish you would have known when you started out, that might help them?
Um, be a student, right? Be a student, get a mentor. By the time when I ended up getting a mentor, it helped the business a lot. So I would say be a student, get a mentor, and don't give up.
I love it. Yep.
So, but Eric, you know what? Listen, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here. It's incredible what you guys are doing at Job Tread. And I think it's really good for us to have these opportunities to just share with the other people out there to give them some hope. So
Absolutely. Well, Vince, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on. I hope you have a great rest of the week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing your continued success, sir.
thanks a lot.
All right, have a good one. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.